7th DTS, and it's bigger than ever. AI is certainly the topic of the moment. And if anybody's been paying attention to the news over the last 24 hours, you can understand how hard it is to plan a commencement address when the news keeps changing. Yesterday, 350 of the top AI scientists and notable figures signed a statement. Now, it was a letter before, and there was a lot of issues around that. And I think the thinking here was simplify it, the message is the same. AI poses an existential threat that needs to be treated with urgency and priority. It is on all of us to be able to regulate and treat it the same as climate crisis, the pandemic, and nuclear. And that's a really provocative statement to make, but the idea here is to provoke discussion, to convey urgency, and to ensure that we don't just sit on our laurels and say, well, let's just see what happens. You know, it mightn't be that bad. You know, it might pass. That's no longer possible, and if the best minds in the world are saying this, everybody needs to sit up and listen. So, on that note, we won't go too far down the rabbit hole on that because, you know, again, it's to prompt discussion and urgency. So, there's many people here in the audience today who are AI experts. There are people who are very well versed in this, and there's a lot of people who know a bit about it. So I think it's just good to set the scene here a little bit. Like, you know, I think we're all on the same page now. It's not a fad, and it's not a productivity tool. It's not that we're not going to be talking about this in 6 or 12 months' time. It'll just be kind of integrated, ubiquitous, and we won't even notice. It very much isn't. People have likened it to the iPhone moment when the internet went mobile, but again, that doesn't feel like the weightiness and the impact and that it really has. And what most people are arriving at now, we're closer to this being the 4th revolution after agricultural, industrial, and digital. We're entering the AI revolution. And it's a revolution because the innovations in AI will persist. It will have impact in society. The economy will be impacted, the global economy will be impacted, and every industry will be impacted. And that's really, really important to realize where we are today. So on that, I'm just going to explain a little bit about the terms of AI, because I think it is useful, because there's a lot of conflating of terms, a lot of misunderstanding as well at the moment. So if we look at AI as a definition, broadly speaking, you could say AI is the ability of a machine to perform a task that would normally require human intelligence. Now, that statement's way up for debate, right? I mean, we still in the EU have not agreed a single statement of what AI is, but that's broadly it, right? And then think about all the different terms that are used for AI. So importantly, we had up to about a year ago, we were almost exclusively talking about a AI called narrow AI. It was also called weak AI, but that's a terrible name because it isn't weak, it's extremely powerful. But it was targeted on very specific tasks. So you would have data and expertise, building models for a very specific task. So think about your Netflix recommender, your predictive text, your Siri or your Alexa, or an AI diagnostic tool. You know, it took expertise, it took data, it took focus. Narrow, again, undermines what it is because it actually not just replicates human intelligence and human ability to do these tasks. It can actually go far beyond that. There's a lot of stuff the human brain can't comprehend that AI does quite easily. You know, large data sets, multidimensionals, things like that. And then there's generative AI. And generative AI, we all know what that is right now. We've heard about it. But it's a relatively new term. Again, if you think about it, a year ago, we weren't really talking about generative AI, or they're, you know, in research circles, but not really in more publicly and generally in the media. So that's stability AI. You type in a command and you get an image. Think of the Pope in the puffer coat. That's generative AI. And open AI, ChatGPT, everybody knows what that is at this point. That, you know, you can enter in anything, it will answer you in a very, very well-spoken, very educated answer almost. There's a lot of hallucinations and it gets some stuff wrong. A lot of people are working on that, but it's almost the authority in which it's said. And it's very powerful across all industries, and I think people are beginning to really comprehend that. And that's important, right? But how that was built was pretty much scraping the internet of text or images like hoovering it up, a digital hoover to build these models, almost unfiltered. Actually, unfiltered is a good way to describe it. And then there's a new concept, again, another new concept you might have heard mentioned called foundation models. And foundation models are, again, OpenAI actually have the GPT model. So you would have heard of GPT-3 or GPT-4. They sit behind ChatGPT. So those models are foundation models because they can be fine-tuned. You can license and fine-tune them into your specific thing, so it can get more clever. So you could actually have a massive company that would fine-tune it to their own company information, their Q&A, their docs, their support docs, their customer information, and it would become very, very intelligent for your company, answering questions about you. But it could also do other tasks. So that's why it's not quite narrow AI. It's still in that foundation models. But that fine-tuning for specific tasks is very powerful. And then you have AGI, artificial general intelligence, also known as superintelligence, also known as strong AI versus weak AI, right? That's the one that the statement is really about. That is when, and it is still not here today, it's not in existence. It's broadly agreed it's not here today. I'm sure you'd have a few people who would argue, but it really, most of us agree it's not here today. But the point about it is, we didn't think generative AI and the foundation models would be as good as they are today. We thought that was years out. We knew they were coming. We knew it was something that people were building. It was something talked about, but we thought it was further. So it's that pace that's been pulled back, and now we're beginning to see it today. I mean, I was surprised when I played this last year. I've been in this space for 25 years. You know, the founders of OpenAI said they were surprised at how well it worked. Geoffrey Hinton, one of the godfathers of AI, was surprised. Everybody was surprised. So that's got everybody thinking now, hang on a second, if that pace has been pulled back, maybe the other thing we thought was 30 to 50 years, or never actually, to be honest, a lot of people thought, maybe that's possible now. And if it is, and it's coming, then we need to be prepared. And that's simply what the statement is, right? So it's not talking about what's today, it's talking about what's coming, and it could be coming a little quicker than we think. So it's also worth talking about what the benefits of AI. Why were people working on AI? What are the benefits? Because we talk about the benefits of AI a lot. And then productivity, sure, absolutely. Everybody can see the benefits if you played with ChatGPT, of productivity in all areas. But then within those space, in the medical field, we have seen huge progress. An antibiotic-resistant superbug, they accelerated the discovery of a treatment for that using AI. And this only recently. Targeted drug delivery treatments, accelerated drug discovery, reducing the cost of healthcare to make it more cost-effective. All that has been made possible with AI today. In education, being able to personalize learning paths, adaptive learning, being able to free up teachers in overcrowded classrooms to perform some of the assessments that give them the information they need to teach. You can imagine a child in a private school getting after-school tutoring in all their subjects, and versus another child in an overcrowded classroom that had no money for tutoring, and you just see the gap widening and widening as they get older. Well, AI can actually help in those tutoring and actually help level the playing field to give the chance for all children to reach their potential. In the climate crisis, AI is being used to process vast quantities of environmental data, to be able to optimize energy usage, green energy production, carbon sinks, to be able to forecast the damage that's going to be done by the climate crisis, to help convince people to start doing something about it. That's really important, as well as what works and what doesn't work when we're trying to address it. Now, on the flip side, you might have heard of a huge sustainability issue around AI, because these large language models are consuming vast quantities of data processing and electricity, and this is a global problem that we have to address. And it's beginning to be addressed, and a lot of people are really looking at it now, going alternatives to the large language models, some of them very focused to be able to deliver the power without the overconsumption. And another topic you hear mentioned a lot is around bias. Right, and what does that mean, and why do we care about it? And what humans are biased, AI biased, who cares? So one thing to really comprehend about everything about AI, it just does stuff at scale, and it does it quickly. A couple of hundred humans can do so much. AI can do the same thing in minutes and affect millions. So a mistake in a model or a bias in a model can have massive ramifications. And a couple of years ago, the Dutch government was doing some machine learning that was trying to detect welfare fraud. And there's a lot of really valuable AI in fraud detection. But what it did was it took a bias perception of who is a welfare fraud. It didn't really do the work on it and ended up classifying 20,000 people as welfare frauds and cut off their payments. And it took a long time to rectify that situation. So then, if that had been happening in one person, the impact wouldn't have been there, right? If you think about bias in the classroom, and this is what we at Soapbox have been looking at, is building models that don't discriminate in the classroom. Because you could imagine a child from one background or another, and there was a study by Stanford, talked about in the New York Times, about how the difference in accuracy between black voices and white voices was 30%. Now, you imagine translating that to a classroom where a child's learning to read and they're using their voice to do that. And if you have an error, you're actually causing one child to be told they're right when they're wrong, wrong when they're right, really affecting their education, and somebody else is getting great benefit, and you're exacerbating inequalities. So the flip side of bias is that humans are biased. No AI is biased. No AI is born biased. It's made biased by the biased data that people lazily pull from the internet or legacy data. For instance, if you took the last 40 years of employment data, who got the job, who applied and who got the job, we all know it will be biased, right? And we're trying to correct that in society. But if you were to take legacy data and pull that into a model, you're propagating that bias into the future. So it's super important to be able to do this. But if we build models right, and we actually carefully design the models in the data, in the deployment, in how that makes decisions, you could actually create objective decision-making as opposed to biased decision-making, and biased decision-making that humans make, right? We could actually do something better there. Another issue is around intellectual property. And intellectual property is a really contentious issue around generative AI. Because if I'm an artist, if I'm a musician, if I've written a book, a movie script, all these things are possible that have been out on the internet, and we believe that scraping of the internet, very possible, and nobody's saying, but everybody kind of knows that when you indiscriminately scrape the internet, you do end up with copyright data in the models. So where does the IP lie? If I created the model, do I own the resulting image of the Pope in the puffer coat? If I wrote Pope in the puffer coat, do I own the intellectual property there? Or does all the people whose images were used in the model, should they get a share of any commercial value here? And these are all the things that are being contested in court right now, and there are no answers because the text moves so fast. It's been debated and it's been legislated for as well at the moment, and these are really, really important. An important thing to mention as well is around jobs, and it's huge. I tend to be having in this role two conversations, one about job loss and one about we don't have enough people to do the work on AI. The job losses will be real. Every revolution it happens. The question is, we do need upskilling and transferal of skills to the AI space. It doesn't have to be technology people. That's really important to realize. The technologists and the engineers and data science, absolutely we need them, but to deploy this, to monitor it, regulate it, get into hands into real products that are useful, all that will require all skills outside of technology as well. So the rate at which those happen has to be really careful, and that's what everybody's paying attention to. There are huge amounts of conversations about that. How can we make sure we don't get this gap in the middle? So I think it's kind of useful to talk briefly about the regulation. There is this mindset, and I've heard it a lot, and I'm sure you all have, regulation stifles innovation. If that was the case, I don't think you wouldn't see innovation in fintech and biotech and medtech and health tech, because they're heavily regulated spaces, but people still manage to operate in them. The other argument is, if we regulate, Russia and China go much further ahead than us, and we lose this race, right? So if you think about that a little more carefully, I heard a great argument for this the other day, or counter-argument for that was, misinformation and disinformation is a huge risk in AI. They're going to get really smart at being able to manipulate, and we've seen it already in social media, but imagine doing that at scale. If we allow it to go unregulated, and nobody has to worry about misinformation, disinformation, freedom of speech, whatever you want to call it, we could end up destabilizing our own governments because of the race in politics and people indiscriminately using these tools because they're not regulated, so it's perfectly fine to use them. We don't have to worry about China and Russia. We'd be worrying about our own economies, and we'll be doing it to ourselves. Regulation can build just good technology, good solid foundations that it works for everybody. It isn't going to cause problems in the future. And another third thing to realize is actually most AI applications aren't going to be regulated. They're going to fall under low risk or medium risk, and there isn't hoops to jump through. It's only when they're regulated as high risk or prohibitive it's an issue, and that's when it impacts human life, safety, when it impacts the future trajectory of somebody's life in terms of education, employment, you can healthcare. You can start to see how it makes sense what's regulated and what's not, and not to get carried away with the idea that regulation is going to stifle us. Everybody is calling for this right now. So in front of Congress last week, 2 weeks ago, Sam Altman, the co-founder of OpenAI, called for an AI agency governance. It called for regulation, licenses for companies that have models over a certain capability. He called for testing and independent validation. But then in the UK last week, the EU, in the meantime, have come up with a new language for the EU AI Act that actually draws in generative AI and foundation models. And he said, it's too much, we're going to leave Europe. So you can understand what's happening here. And that was rolled back within days, by the way, like the Cube, massive backlash, politicians, everybody got rolled back. So they're not going anywhere, they're staying in Europe. But what's happening is people are calling for regulation in the future. That stuff's bad, what we're doing now is fine. But we got this very wrong with social media. We didn't regulate. We left people, freedom of speech, let the markets decide, people will learn, we just can't regulate, it's too hard. It stifles innovation. We did that with social media. It hasn't ended well. There are some benefits, but there is a huge amount of negative stuff, particularly around kids and depression and what it does to society as a negative. That ship sailed. It's almost impossible to regulate that now. This is a much more powerful technology. We can't make that mistake. So the EU have changed the wording, as I said. It includes generative AI, it includes foundations. It's only in the last month. Includes a lot more prohibitive, completely prohibited use cases around manipulation, in elections, misinformation. People just have to be mindful of what the technology's been using for, and it can't just be, black box, no idea. Peter said whatever, That's not right, and the EU aren't going to stand by it. The G7 have said similarly. So what we're starting to see is harmonization globally, that this is the right thing to do. Now, there will be pushback. People will fight and kick and give out about it, but it's for all our good that we do this, and we do it right, and we do it now, and we put in guardrails now so that when the big stuff comes at us, we're in a very good position. It's very hard to try and insert this later. So in conclusion, I asked my 10-year-old son yesterday, what did he think AI was? And bearing in mind he loves Marvel movies, he said, AI is it's a very powerful technology. It can do great good for humanity, but if it's used incorrectly, it can be really dangerous. And to be honest, I couldn't say it better myself, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Fabulous. What a warm welcome, and what a fascinating opening keynote, really setting the scene, bringing all of the issues right to the table there. So thank you very much, Dr. Scanlon. We do have a question from one of the lovely people who installed the app, one of many lovely people who installed the app, I'm sure. This question is from Tashi Gyaltsen. So thank you so much for this question. It's brilliant. This morning, one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence, Joshua Bengio, said he would have prioritized safety over usefulness had he realized the pace at which it would evolve. Where do you stand on this?
100%.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Look, this is back to the statement that was released yesterday. We didn't expect it. And Geoffrey Hinton said the same thing, right? Yeah. Geoffrey Hinton's regretting certain things. But the idea is it was expected and unexpected. And people often talk about the pace of change, about if it goes slowly, you have more time to put the guardrails on. But when things come at you fast, you have to react fast. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. People like this coming out and saying they're concerned we should have prioritized safety. You know, it means all of us have to sit up and listen. There's no point any one country doing a solo run on this, by the way, right?
100%, yes.
It is international collaboration. And as far as I can see, I think I'm really happy to see the urgency that's been put on it. And, you know, let's see. I hope we're having a more positive conversation next time.
I do hope so too. I hope you'll come back and join us and give us an update in the future. But until then, ladies and gents, please join me in thanking Dr. Patricia Scanlon. Thank you.